She told a judge she built my life and deserved half, $9 million my company, and the Texas ranch my grandfather staked in '52. I looked her in the eye and said, "Fine. Before you decide I've lost my mind, give me 60 seconds. I'm sitting in a courthouse parking lot with dust on my boots, a manila folder on the seat, and the Ford keys biting my palm. Everyone in that room thought I just surrendered. They didn't see the other half of the board. You can win on paper and still lose in reality. Most folks learn that too late. I didn't. While she was counting my excavators and contracts, I was counting moves. 2 signatures, 1 trust, and a structure she's never heard of turned her payday into a problem. If you've ever had someone circle what you built with a red pen and call it theirs, keep watching. I'll show you how saying yes can be the cleanest way to say no. I started with a rusted Ford, a borrowed toolbox, and a promise I made to myself the day my dad died. Be the man who shows up. I took every job no one wanted, fixing cracked driveways, hauling debris, pouring concrete in August heat that bent the horizon. 1 client turned into 3, 3 into a dozen. I learned to bid fair, pay on Fridays, and shake hands like it meant something. The first time I covered payroll for 10 men, I sat in that truck and cried, not from fear, but from pride. We grew into steel frames and shopping centers, then hospitals and schools. 45 employees, multi-million-dollar contracts. What never changed was the ritual. Coffee at 5:30, boots on by 6, a quiet prayer for clear heads and no injuries. That morning rhythm built my life, piece by piece, and I believed the foundation was solid until I noticed hairline cracks where I never expected them, at my own kitchen table. Our ranch sits where Texas sky swallows the road. Panhandle wind hums through barbed wire and dust lifts in long ribbons behind a truck. My grandfather staked that land in '52. My father taught me to drive on the ranch road, 2 fingers on the wheel, the other hand resting easy, like we had all the time in the world. We didn't, but it felt that way. We replaced fence posts after school, counted calves in the dark with breath like steam. That land isn't just dirt, it's a ledger of every back we ever broke and every prayer we ever whispered. When business got rough in the early years, the ranch carried me. When the business took off, the ranch reminded me not to get loud about it. You don't brag to land, you respect it. I thought marriage worked the same way. Quiet care, steady hands. Then one day the wind shifted. The house felt colder, and the porch light didn't mean welcome anymore. I met Karen in a lecture hall that smelled like dry markers and vending machine coffee. I was taking night classes in construction management. She was chasing a communications degree and a city byline. I wore boots to class. She wore ambition like perfume. We studied at a diner off campus. She'd edit my papers. I'd explain load-bearing beams on napkins. I liked that she laughed when I walked in covered in dust, like I was proof there were still men who built things you could touch. We married young, split rent on a bad apartment, and counted nickels to keep the lights on. On our first anniversary, I framed a receipt from the lumberyard and hung it above the bed as a joke. She called it romantic. We'll build a life. Back then, we meant 2 hands, same direction. I never imagined the day that word would feel like a courtroom word, or that her pen would stop writing stories about us and start tallying mine. Our first house had squeaky floors and a faucet that groaned like an old man, but it was ours. Friday nights were pizza on paper plates and road maps for the future spread across the table. Karen used to ask about crews and clients and laugh when I tracked mud inside. When the company got its first big commercial job, she kissed me on the driveway and said, "Don't forget who you are." I promised I wouldn't. We didn't take vacations much, work does that to you, but we took drives out to the ranch and planned things we couldn't afford yet. She liked the porch. I liked how the silence let me hear my father's voice. Those were good years. I missed a few dinners. She forgave me. She missed a few Sundays. I forgave her. That's marriage, I thought. You hold each other up. You don't keep score. I was so certain of that rule I didn't notice when someone quietly started keeping score. It started small. She asked about a skid steer like it was a new word she'd heard on the radio. Then she asked what a dozer cost to run. Harmless, I figured. Everyone gets curious. But the tone changed. Less, how was your day? More, what's that worth? She wanted numbers, not stories. How much cash sits in the business account during slow months? How many machines are owned free and clear? I'm a straightforward man. I don't speak in riddles, and I don't hide my ledgers. But even a straight man can feel when a question has a hook in it. I told myself marriage deserves trust. I told myself not to build walls where none were needed. But I also told myself something my dad once said while tightening a fence line. Good hearts still check the posts. That night, while locking up the shop, I realized I'd started checking the posts. And I didn't like where my hands were pulling. I was on site at a mall project, sun bouncing off sheet metal when she called. Ethan, how do you depreciate excavators? Her voice was bright like someone ordering a latte. I could hear rebar clanging and a crew chief shouting for the breaker. About 40 grand a year per machine, I said. Why? She laughed it off. Just trying to understand your world better. The call ended, and I stood there with my hard hat crooked and something bitter rising in my throat. In 20 years, Karen never asked about depreciation schedules. She asked if I was safe, if I needed dinner, if the crew needed cold water. I told myself to focus. We had a problem layer under the soil and a deadline that didn't care about my marriage. But when a young operator asked, "Boss, what now?" I heard my own voice say, "Rent the breaker." And underneath it, another voice asked, "Who taught your wife that question?" That night, the house smelled like garlic and the evening news. Karen had a yellow notepad by the cutting board, lines of neat handwriting, dates, job names, numbers with dollar signs. "What's the notebook for?" I asked, gentle as I could. "I'm learning," she said, tapping the page. "I've been married to you half my life. Maybe it's time I understood the business." On paper, that sounded fair. In practice, it felt like a stranger in my pantry. I kept my voice calm, explained project cycles, tried to turn it into a marriage moment instead of a cross-examination. She nodded a lot, but her eyes were somewhere else, counting something I couldn't see. Later, I sat in the truck with the dome light on and tried to pray. The words came out tight. My father used to say, "A house knows when it's loved." That kitchen felt like it was holding its breath. I told myself to be patient. The notepad told me to be careful. Friday night, the guys came over. In Texas, you talk life over smoke and meat. Tony flipped ribs. Bill brought a cooler and a banker's caution. Conversation drifted into wives, sons, busted knuckles, and interest rates. I mentioned Karen's new questions, kept it light. Tony stopped seasoning mid-shake. "My ex started asking about equipment values before she left," he said. "I thought she finally cared about what I did. Turns out her lawyer cared." Bill set down his drink. "You want me to look at how your accounts are structured, just to make sure you're protected?" I waved it off. Pride is a loud thing, but their faces didn't change. Men who've lived a little know the look of a storm on the horizon. When the coals settled and the laughter thinned, Tony clapped my shoulder and said, "Trust, but verify, brother." I went home smelling like smoke and worry, and the porch light didn't feel like a welcome sign anymore. A week later, I doubled back to grab blueprints I'd left at home. The house was quiet in that heavy afternoon way. I pushed open my office door and saw Karen at the filing cabinet, phone tilted, the screen reflecting a contract header I knew by heart. "What are you doing?" I asked. She flinched like I'd caught a thief, then forced a smile. "Looking for tax documents. Thought I'd organize them." "Taxes are in the safe," I said. "They always have been." She shrugged, kept her eyes on the phone, and told me not to be paranoid. I stood there in my own office, feeling like a guest in a room I built, listening to the soft click of her camera. Something hard settled in my chest. That night, we lay in the same bed and stared at different ceilings. By morning, my mind was made up. If someone was counting my life by pages and photos, it was time I counted my moves. That night, we lay back to back like strangers renting the same room. I could hear the soft hum of the AC and the ice maker drop a cube in the kitchen, little domestic sounds that used to calm me. Now they felt like a house clearing its throat, waiting to speak. I watched the numbers change on the clock and counted the years we'd shared. Holidays, busted pipes, good news said at midnight with our feet touching. I wanted to roll over and ask, "Are we okay?" But the question died in my chest. A man learns to read silence like weather. This was the sky going dark at noon. I thought about my father, how he'd sit on the edge of the bed and lace his boots slow when something was on his mind. By 3 a.m., I was sitting like that. I told myself I'd stop guessing and start doing. Morning would not find me unprepared. If trust was a fence, I was checking every post. By noon, I was in a wood-paneled office that smelled like coffee and copy toner. Robert Hayes had ranch hands in his family and oil men on his client list. He shook my hand once, then went straight to it. Ethan, if she files, the court can freeze your accounts. They call it an asset freeze. It stops transfers, sales, all of it. I stared at the framed photo of him holding a newborn in hospital blue and felt my ribs tighten, like a belt pulled one hole too far. He slid a legal pad toward me and drew boxes like a coach diagramming a play. You're not the first good man to be surprised in a courtroom, but you don't have to be the easiest. He asked for plain answers. What I owned, what I owed, what mattered most. The ranch, I said. My voice surprised me, rougher than I meant. He nodded once. Then we protect the ranch first. I left with a list and a plan. Robert didn't talk in Latin. He talked in the kind of sentences you can repeat to your brother over a beer. Texas treats what you build during marriage as community property, he said. That means your business, machines, accounts, unless clearly separate, are on the table. Judges try to split things just and right. That isn't always 50-50, but it can be. I pictured excavators lined up like cattle at an auction, each tagged with a price. The idea made my stomach turn. Can they touch the ranch? I asked. Depends how it's titled and when, he said. But if it's in your name and grew in value during the marriage, they'll talk about it. He let that sit. The law's not out to ruin you, Ethan, but it won't rescue you either. You have to set the table before anyone sits down. I drove home repeating his words like a prayer with tools in it. Just and right. Set the table. Protect what matters. We met again 2 days later with coffee gone cold and pens that didn't stop. We separate the valuable assets from the day-to-day, Robert said, drawing 2 boxes, operations and holdings. Walker Construction keeps the jobs, the payroll, the trucks that move. He tapped the other box. Walker Holdings owns the heavy iron, the property, the contracts worth real money. Operations pays to use them. He looked at me to see if I'd balk. I didn't. Men like me don't mind grease under our nails, but we're slow to trust paper. Still, I understood machinery. This was machinery too. Gears you can't see, turning all the same. We filed articles, reserved names, opened accounts that would hold what fed the company. I signed until the letters in my name went soft. This isn't cheating, Robert said. It's structure. Smart wins before the game starts. I walked out into late sun and thought, fine, then let's start winning before the whistle. When we talked about the ranch, my voice dropped without me meaning it to. Robert noticed. Family trust, he said gently. You place the land there with rules about who can inherit. Blood relatives only. It removes the ranch from reach in a divorce because you, Ethan Walker, won't personally own it anymore. The trust does. I pictured my grandfather's hands, rope burned, steady, tying a gate. I thought of the first time my father let me drive the old truck, my wrist bones buzzing on the washboard road. That land is our story. I don't want to weaponize it, I said. You're not, he replied. You're honoring it. This ensures the Walker name still means a place on a map. He slid the draft across the desk. You'll be the trustee. You'll steward it, not sell it. I signed and felt something settle inside me, not victory, but alignment. Like setting a post plumb and true, the kind of straight that survives a storm. Paper doesn't feel like armor until you need it. We notarized, recorded, stamped. Each thud of the seal sounded like a nail driven home. I carried copies out in a simple manila folder that suddenly felt heavier than a bag of concrete. At a red light, I opened it and read my own name in new places, trustee, manager, member, and thought how strange it is to become different on paper while being the same man in work boots. War isn't my language. I build, I fix. But as the sun slid down behind a row of cottonwoods, I understood what my father meant by fix the roof before the rain. This was that. I put the folder on the passenger seat, next to the Ford keys that bite my palm when I grip too hard. "All right," I said to no one. "If this is a fight, it'll be a quiet one, and I'm done being surprised." The light turned green. I drove. After the filings, I watched without acting like a cop in his own kitchen. Karen took more calls in the hallway, voice soft, words careful. She started going to lunches with friends I'd never met. Sandra, Maddie, names said without details, as if the details might stain the air. I told myself not to turn into a jealous teenager. I did what men my age do when something gnaws. We keep the routine. Up at 5:30, coffee, weather, boots, job site. But the routine felt thinner, like the sole of an old boot. One afternoon I found a receipt from a place she'd never liked, a hotel restaurant tucked near the freeway. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. At dinner she smiled and asked about my day, and I answered like always, leaving out the part where my guts felt like a twisted strap. I went to bed early. Sleep didn't come. A man can feel a house go off balance. The next morning I asked straight, "Who's Sandra?" Karen didn't look up from her coffee. "From my book club." "Your book club meets Thursday nights," I said. This was lunch. Her eyes sharpened. "Why are you interrogating me, Ethan?" The room shrank. I don't like fights. I don't like shouting. I build for a living because building feels like prayer, measured, useful, leaving something standing when you're done. Still, I couldn't swallow it. "You've been different." The questions, the photos in my office. Her face went cold. "You're paranoid." That word hung in the air like a slap. I remembered the yellow notepad, the depreciation call, the hotel receipt. My voice came out too even. "Paranoid men don't have folders." "What folder?" she asked, but I let the question die. There are moments you realize the person across from you is no longer on your side. That was mine. I rinsed my cup, grabbed my jacket, and chose distance over damage. At the weekly planning meeting, Derek leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers, and asked in a tone I'd never heard from him, "How's cash flow next quarter?" He'd always cared about drawings, deadlines, the feel of a beam settling right. Money talk lived on my side of the table. "Solid," I said. "Why?" He shrugged like it was nothing. "Just making sure we can cover materials if banks tighten." He smiled, but not with his eyes. I nodded, made a note I didn't need to make, and felt the air shift between us. Maybe I was seeing ghosts. Maybe I was finally seeing clearly. After the meeting, I stood by the window and watched him leave, phone already at his ear, his truck door slamming like a period. Robert's words ran through my head, "Set the table before anyone sits down." I checked a few more posts that afternoon, passwords, backups, access logs, and slept even less that night. Something was coming. I could feel it. 2 days later, I doubled back to the office for a roll of blueprints. Derek's truck was still in the lot after dark. The building hummed the way buildings do when only the machines are awake. I unlocked the back door and heard his voice through the half-closed office door. "Yeah, the equipment valuations are in the files I showed you. The real money's in long-term contracts and bonding capacity." My hand froze on the doorknob. A pause, then. "Once we have the client list, we can underbid him on everything." Him, not us. My chest went cold. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing," Derek said, and he laughed. "Ethan trusts people, always has. That's his weakness." Paper rustled. My name sounded wrong in his mouth. I stepped back on instinct, like a deer feeling a twig snap. Quiet as I came, I left, heart kicking hard against the folder under my arm. By the time I hit the parking lot, my hands were shaking. I sat in my truck with the engine off, the cab dark, replaying Derek's words like a bad song stuck on repeat. Client list, bonding capacity, underbid him. I'd spent years teaching him how we win work the right way, shake hands, do the job, earn the next one. Now he was using my own playbook against me. I scrolled through my phone and found emails he'd sent late at night, attachments I hadn't noticed before, contracts, bid histories. It wasn't proof by itself, but it lined up with what I heard through that half-open door. I pictured our clients, men who trusted the steady, not the slick, and my stomach turned. Betrayal has a strange taste. It's metallic, like you bit your tongue and didn't know it. I told myself to breathe, then I did what builders do. Assess, plan, act. Step 1, lock down access. Step 2, document everything. Step 3, stop giving benefit of the doubt to someone who took it like a gift. I pulled onto the highway, the kind of Texas night where the sky looks bigger than your problems. Derek's laugh wouldn't leave my head. Ethan trusts people, always has. That's his weakness. Trust has built more for me than it's ever broken. But he wasn't wrong about one thing. I give people room. My father told me once, "Son, a good man's rope is long, but it still has an end." I'd reached mine. I thought about the day Derek joined me, fresh out of a bad firm, eyes hungry to build something honest. We stood on a slab and talked about earning respect instead of buying it. Where did that man go? I tightened my grip on the wheel and felt the Ford keys bite my palm. The road hummed. Somewhere between the exit signs and the cattle guards, I made a quiet promise. If trust was my weakness, clarity would be my strength. No more guessing, no more hoping. Time to see the picture in hard light. I parked in my driveway and just sat there, fingers shaking against the leather, watching my porch light spill onto the steps. It wasn't fear, it was grief. Not the funeral kind, the kind where a door to your own house feels like it belongs to someone else. I tried to catalog the hits, a wife counting my life in dollar signs, a partner carving my business with a smile. Betrayal comes as a pair because one by itself lets you shrug it off. Two cuts teach you you've been standing with your back too wide open. I remembered the early days, cold coffee, hot concrete, payroll and a rubber band, and what I loved most, certainty. You pour, it sets. You weld, it holds. People aren't like that. I rubbed my hands together to steady them and realized this was the first time in years I'd come home and not felt safe. I shut off the engine. The house was waiting. So was the decision I'd already made. Karen was curled up on the couch when I walked in, TV washing the room in blue. "Hey, you eat?" she asked without looking away from the screen. It was the kind of question married people ask on autopilot. I said I was fine and leaned against the doorway like a guest. She told me about a friend's new kitchen backsplash, asked if the crew finished the mall slab, and laughed at a joke from a sitcom I couldn't hear. It all sounded normal, and none of it felt real. I wanted to say, "Who are you calling? What are you photographing? Why do I feel like a suspect in my own life?" Instead, I watched her put the remote down and tuck her legs under a blanket I bought on a road trip we can't talk about anymore. "You're quiet," she said. "Long day," I answered. She nodded, the conversation already gone. I went to my office, closed the door, and stared at the filing cabinet. By morning, I'd made a list. At the top, in block letters, "Get the truth." Robert had mentioned a private investigator who knew fraud cases like ranchers know weather. I called. Dana Collins picked up on the second ring, voice steady and unhurried. I told her the short version, questions about equipment, photos in my office, a partner with a new tone and old access. "You're not overreacting," she said. "You're late reacting, which is normal for decent men." That stung, but I'd rather be stung by the truth than stroked by a lie. "Meet me this afternoon," she said. "Bring what you have. Don't tell anyone you're coming, not your wife, not your partner." I printed emails, pulled copies of contracts, and slid them into the manila folder that had started to feel like a life jacket. Leaving the house, I paused at the doorway and listened. Silence. Then the small click of a text being sent in the kitchen. I kept walking. Dana's office sat between a tax prep place and a sandwich shop. No marble floors, no fake fern, just a clean desk and eyes that missed nothing. She flipped through my papers, asked questions without softening the edges, then said, "I need 3 weeks for a complete picture. Phones, financials, patterns. If there's an affair or a plan, we'll know." The number hung there. 3 weeks. A lot can break in less time. "Meanwhile," she added, "don't tip your hand. Routine is your friend. If you change your rhythm, they'll change theirs." I thought of concrete cures. You can't rush it without ruining it. "I'll send you reports as I go," she said, "but understand, the first answer is rarely the whole answer." I left with a receipt, a burner number, and a strange comfort. Somebody on my side had a flashlight and knew where to point it. On the sidewalk, A hot wind pushed my shirt flat. 3 weeks. Fine. I've waited longer to raise a building. So I did what men do when the ground feels soft. We make it look solid. Up at 5:30. Coffee, headlines, weather. Boots on, belt tight, truck in gear. On site by 7. I walked the slabs, checked rebar, signed invoices, and shook hands. I told a young operator to keep his thumb clear of a pinch point, then went quiet because I could hear my father's voice in the advice. Normal is a kind of armor if you wear it right, but it weighed more each day. I ate lunch out of a cooler on the tailgate and stared at the notebook where I write bids and prayers in the same pen. At home, I kissed the top of Karen's head and asked about her day. She smiled like people do when they're hiding a present, and I wondered which one of us was being wrapped. Nights were worst. The house creaked and I counted nails in my head, anything to drown out the sound of second guesses. When you know something's wrong but you can't prove it, every ordinary thing starts looking dangerous. A lunch with Sandra that went long, a dress I'd never seen for a meeting. Her phone turned face down, the way folks do when the screen tells the truth before they're ready. I don't snoop. I don't need to. The room tells you what you need if you've lived in it long enough. I watched the way she set down her glass, careful, like noise might alert someone. I noticed the way she asked about the mall contract, not the men who poured it. Dana texted once. Progress. No details. That was the deal. I kept my hands off the fuse and reminded myself, trust the process you chose. It felt like walking across floorboards in an old house, the kind that sag but don't always break. I stepped light, I stepped straight, and I circled the same question every night. How much of this is still ours? On a Wednesday that smelled like hot tar, Dana called. Can you come in this afternoon? She asked. You're not going to like this. The drive felt longer than it was. Inside, she didn't waste my time. She set a folder down and looked me in the eye. Your wife has been planning a divorce for over a year, she said. She met with multiple attorneys and investigators. She also appears to be in a relationship with Derek. I didn't speak. My hands found each other on the edge of the chair and locked there. Dana kept going. Dates, receipts, photos. Professional, not cruel. I stared at the man and the woman in those pictures and didn't recognize either, though I knew both by name and habit. The room narrowed to the width of the folder. Somewhere far off, a printer hummed. Dana's voice softened. You hired me for the truth. This is it. I nodded. The only sound I made was air leaving a tire. Dana pushed the folder across the desk. Hotel bills, restaurant charges, a schedule that lined up with the lunches Karen never liked explaining, screenshots that showed Derek forwarding files to an email that wasn't mine. In the back, a neat chart, assets they'd identified, numbers scribbled in a stranger's hand. They think they know the whole picture, Dana said. They don't. I closed the folder and saw myself in the reflection of her office window, older than I felt last month, stronger than I thought I'd be today. I thanked her, slid the folder into my bag, and felt its weight settle like a tool I finally knew how to use. Outside, the sun hit hard. I stood on the sidewalk and let it. Then I called Robert. It's time, I said. We move everything into place. And when the papers come, I'm going to agree to every last demand. He was quiet a long beat. That's a bold way to say no. Exactly, I said. Dana laid out the timeline like a carpenter squaring a frame. 14 months. That was the length of the shadow behind me, starting the month my father died. While I was settling his estate and learning how grief changes the sound of a house, Karen was meeting attorneys, comparing strategies, and building a map with my life as the legend. I don't spook easy, but there's a special chill that comes when you realize your worst days were someone else's window. I could see it now. The hospital coffee, the funeral black, the handshake at the graveside, then the consultations beginning, crisp and private. It wasn't an argument or a blowout that undid us. It was a project plan. Every man my age has buried a parent or a friend and knows the fog that follows. I was in that fog. She was counting exits. The climax wasn't a scream. It was a date circled in red, older than my sorrow and sharp as a nail. Then came the part that made my ribs feel hollow. 10 months. That's how long the affair had been its own routine. hotel check-ins, separate receipts, a pattern carved into ordinary days. Derek wasn't some stranger. He was the man who stood beside me in muddy boots and ate gas station burritos after midnight pours. I'd once clapped his back and called him brother in the way men do when we've pulled each other through deadlines and disasters. 10 months is enough time to build a barn if you know what you're doing. Enough time to build a lie if you don't care what it costs. I thought about the Saturdays I spent at the ranch fixing a gate, believing the quiet was saving us. Turns out, my quiet bought them space. The climax wasn't the word affair. It was seeing 10 months as a structure, studs, nails, drywall, and knowing I'd walked past it daily, never noticing the fresh paint. Dana slid the evidence across the desk, each item neat as invoices, hotel receipts with cash at check-in and credit cards at dinner, a loyalty number that didn't belong to either of them. Photos from a distance where smiles looked truest. Screenshots showed Derek forwarding client lists to a private email, my contracts listed like cattle with ear tags. I'm a practical man. Proof helps me breathe. But proof also slices. I held a photo of them laughing over a steak I'd recommended once on a good day, back when a good day was still uncomplicated. It wasn't the wine glasses or the angle that did me in. It was the familiarity, carefree shoulders, a joke I wasn't invited to. Older men know this hit. You think you're braced until your own handwriting appears on a document used against you. The climax landed without raising its voice. Paper doesn't lie, and pictures don't apologize. There's a moment you remember because your body marks it, skin tight, breath short, like the world shrank by a quarter inch. Mine came when my eyes met a photo of Derek wearing the same jacket he wore the day we carried my father's casket. I can still feel the handle, the weight that had nothing to do with pounds. We were 4 across, stepping like a single animal that knows not to stumble. After the service, Derek stood with me under a cottonwood and said, "Your old man raised you right." I believed him. Looking at that jacket in the picture, my stomach turned. Not because a man I trusted fell short. Men fail. Because the memory of him beside me, honoring my father, was now threaded into a betrayal that felt rehearsed. Men 30 to 65 know this math. History multiplies the hurt. The climax tightened like a knot. My grief had been used as cover and I could taste the rope. Dana didn't slow down. "They're planning a company," she said, tapping a chart with arrows that pointed from my assets to their launch date. "Your wife brings the settlement. Derek brings relationships and inside numbers. They undercut your bids with your own data." It was tidy in the way theft gets when it wears a suit. I pictured my crew, guys who put their backs into work before the sun warms the steel, standing on a job site run by 2 people who'd never bled for a pour. The idea offended something basic in me, the way watching someone kick a dog off a porch does. Men my age know what it is to build a reputation inch by inch. We also know how fast a rumor can ruin it. The climax clicked, not loud but final. They weren't just leaving. They were trying to step into my boots while I was still wearing them, and they thought they had the feet for it. When the noise in your head won't quiet, you go where it can't follow. I pointed the truck north toward the panhandle, where sky and grass repeat like a hymn. The road narrowed to a strip between pastures. Wind pushed the mirror and rattled the straw on the floorboard. By the time I reached the cabin, dusk had started its slow, honest work. That building isn't much. Logs that creak, stone that keeps cool even in August. But it's where my thoughts stand up straight. I sat on the porch steps and let the boards press lines into the backs of my legs like a brand that says home. The phone was heavy in my pocket. The folder was heavier beside me. Men who've lived a little understand the therapy of distance. Tools get quiet, and truth gets louder. The climax wasn't a decision yet. It was a silence that told me I'd already made one, and I was finally ready to hear it. Granddad didn't homestead with hashtags. He staked out a life with wire, sweat, and a stubbornness the panhandle respects. Family lore says he marked the first 40 with a pocket knife and a prayer, then borrowed 2 horses and more hope than sense. He built this cabin from trees that had no business standing up to our wind, and somehow they did. As a kid, I'd sit on his lap and pretend the knots in the logs were maps to places we'd go. He'd tell me, "Land doesn't owe you, you owe land your best." That line became a rule I didn't know I was following until now. The ranch kept me honest when checks were thin. It kept me humble when contracts got fat. Thinking of his hands, cracked and certain, I felt my heart beat slow like a truck downshifting on a grade. The climax was quiet. If I dishonored this ground by losing it to schemers, I'd be arguing with a dead man who still wins. Dad taught me fences the old way. Dig true, set plumb, tamp steady, and check each post by eye and by feel. A fence is a promise, he'd say, wiping his forearm across his forehead. It keeps in what you love and keeps out what would ruin it. We replaced a mile of line one summer when I was 12, him humming along with the crickets, me pretending I wasn't tired. When a post leaned, he never scolded. He lifted it, corrected it, and made me see the difference between almost and right. In town, folks knew my father as the man who didn't cut corners, even when corners begged. Sitting on the porch, I realized I'd been treating my life like a fence I only glanced at from the road. The climax arrived like a tool in my hand. I would reset what mattered, straight and legal, so the next storm could blow as it pleased. By the time stars pricked through, the plan was simple enough to say out loud, give them everything they're asking for, on paper. Agree to $9 million, half the company, the ranch. Each word a hook I turned into a handle. They wanted a victory they could frame. I'd hand it to them and make sure the frame held air. Holdings would own the heavy iron. The trust would hold the land. The operating company would be a shell that did the work but kept nothing that could be sold in a hurry. Men my age understand strategy when it's told in plain metaphors. I'd let them win the scoreboard while I won the field position. The climax felt like the click of a seatbelt before a turn you know is coming. I wasn't dodging the hit. I was choosing where it landed. That's not malice. That's stewardship. I stepped off the porch and made the call with the night pressing close, the way it does when you finally stopped pacing. Robert picked up on the first ring. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm clear," I said. "When the papers come, we agree to every line. All of it." He went quiet long enough for a coyote to bark and the sound to carry. "Ethan," he said carefully, "you understand what that looks like from the bench?" "I do," I answered. "But I'm not trying to look brave. I'm trying to be finished. And the finish starts with yes." I laid it out in a minute, the way you explain a job to a crew that trusts your math. Holdings, trust, operations, clean transfers, clean records. "We'll need everything airtight," he said. "Then make it airtight," I told him. The climax was simple and final. I hung up, slid the manila folder back under my arm, and felt for the first time in months like the builder again. Robert didn't sugarcoat it. "Ethan, this is risky. Judges hate feeling played. If she files and we look slick, you'll buy yourself headaches." I nodded, hands flat on his desk like I was testing the level on a form. "What else do I have?" I asked. He leaned back, eyes on a framed photo of his dad in a feed store cap. "You have timing, you have clean paperwork, you have truth if we keep it tight." He slid a checklist toward me. What to title, what to move, what to leave alone. It felt like a job walk. Scope, sequence, safety. I could work with that. Men my age don't mind hard. We mind sloppy. "One more thing," he said. "Don't let anger steer. Anger cuts corners." I thought about the porch, the fence line, my grandfather's hands. "I'll build this straight," I said, "even if they don't deserve it." He tapped the list. "Then let's start measuring twice." I stood up already counting cuts. I drove home with the radio low and the plan loud. When you've poured as many slabs as I have, you learn control isn't about stopping the rain. It's about getting the water to run where you want. "At least I control the board," I told myself at a red light, feeling the Ford keys bite my palm. I'd been reacting for months. Now I was setting the rhythm. My father used to coach Little League with one rule: own the count. That's all this was. Owning the count. I called Robert from the driveway and confirmed our sequence for filings, then texted Tony about tightening document access for audit season. No panic, no drama. Men 30 to 65 know this move. Fix the leak while the party's still going. Inside, Karen asked about dinner. I cooked eggs and talked about weather and rebar deliveries, steady as a metronome. Control isn't loud. It's choosing your next inch. Mine started tomorrow at 9 o'clock a.m. We started with the heavy iron, excavators, dozers, the machines that make banks smile and lawyers circle. Titles moved from Walker Construction to Walker Holdings with chains of paper clean enough to pass a white glove. Next came long-term contracts, assigned by consent where it made sense, mirrored by usage agreements where it didn't. The operating company kept the crews, invoices, insurance. Holdings owned what mattered if someone came swinging. Last was the ranch, the heart. Deed to trust, trust rules signed, bloodline language locked like a gate. I didn't hide a dime. I organized the value I'd bled for so it couldn't be dragged off by folks who never dug a footing. Older men will get this. It felt like moving cattle ahead of a storm. You don't hate the weather. You respect it and act. Robert checked every line. I initialed until my name looked like fencing wire. Each signature steadied me. The build was solid. Now we'd see if it held. Courthouse counters, bank desks, notary stamps thumping like a framing gun. Paperwork has its own music when it's done right. We signed articles, recorded deeds, opened accounts with titles that sounded like suits but worked like tools. The notary pressed a raised seal into thick stock, and I felt protection in the same way you feel a roof go on. The noise drops. The space makes sense. Robert checked dates, matched names, and shook his head once when a clerk tried to help by skipping a step. "We don't skip," he said. "We don't need favors." Men my age understand that sentence. Favors age badly. Process ages well. I carried a manila folder that grew heavier with every stamp, and for the first time in months, the weight didn't scare me. It reassured me. This wasn't hiding. It was housekeeping. And when a house is in order, a storm can pound it all afternoon and still find nothing loose to steal. At home, Karen moved through rooms like someone who'd rehearsed a victory speech. New dress, new nails, laughter on calls that ended when I walked in. She started leaving articles open on her tablet about equitable division and supporting a spouse's career, the kind of reading you do when you've already made up your mind. I didn't argue. I grilled steaks, fixed a leaky pea trap, and sent the crew schedule at 9 p.m. like always. Confidence is funny. The wrong kind gets louder, the right kind gets quieter. I stacked my folder on the hall table where she couldn't miss it and titled it Maintenance Logs. She never touched it. Meanwhile, Tony asked if I wanted him to order new hard hats with the updated logo. I told him to wait a week. "Change is coming," I said, "but we'll make it look like we planned it." He nodded once. Men who work with their hands read subtext just fine. Derek swung by my office late, hands in pockets, that casual tone you use when you're checking a lock with your shoulder. "Big month ahead," he said. "Couple more weeks and, well, we'll all be breathing easier." He let the line hang like bait. I looked past him at the drafting table we'd nicked up together over the years, little cuts from box cutters and coffee rings from late nights that meant something. "Breathing's important," I said. He smiled, but it stopped short of his eyes. "You good on cash for materials if banks tighten?" He was back to that song. "We're fine," I said, and made a note I didn't need to make. He lingered, scanning, as if a file might jump up and confess. I waited him out. When he left, I shut the door gently and stood in the quiet. Some men speak in paragraphs. Others tell on themselves in one sentence. He'd said plenty. I have a talent for making normal look normal. It's a builder's trick. Keep the site tidy, keep the noise down, let the real work happen where weather can't touch it. I kept my voice even at meetings, praised crews who earned it, and asked Derek for updates the way I always had. I took Karen to dinner at the same barbecue place we'd loved before life got complicated, then tipped the kid who cleared our table like nothing weighed more than ribs on a Friday. Inside, the gears turned, passwords rotated, access narrowed, backups duplicated off-site. Routine is camouflage when you do it right. Men 30 to 65 know this. Don't show your hand until the pot is worth it. Every night I stacked signed documents in the safe, then told the house goodnight the way my father did. Lights off in order, one last glance at the porch. Fresh concrete looks calm. Only the finishers know how fast it's curing. The papers came early, like a cold front that changes the smell of the air before it arrives. I was in the site trailer with Tony, coffee going stale in styrofoam and a whiteboard full of tasks, when a process server knocked. "Ethan Walker?" "That's me." He handed over a thick envelope and left without a word. Tony looked at the seal, then at me. I didn't rush. I set the envelope down, finished my note about rebar delivery, and then opened what I already knew was inside. Dissolution. Demands. The works. Tony's jaw tightened. Bad news, boss? I folded the first page and slid it back into the envelope. News we expected, I said. Outside, a loader beeped in reverse, steady as a heartbeat. I looked at the men who count on me for checks and safety, and saw exactly why we'd done all this. Keep the morning moving, I told Tony. Then I put the envelope in the drawer with my pens. At lunch, I read every line. 9 million, half the company, the ranch, spousal support that could choke a good month and eat a bad one whole. The list was neat, like someone had enjoyed matching columns. I pictured a conference room somewhere with bottled water and a smiley paralegal handing out highlighters. Older men know this feeling, the sum of your sweat written down by someone who never saw you bleed. I closed my eyes and saw my grandfather's fence, my father's hands, the first payroll I ever signed with a shaking wrist. Then I saw holdings, the trust, the clean transfers lined up like a row of posts set plumb, paper cuts both ways. I called Robert. It's all here, I said. Good, he answered. Then we stick to the plan. I put the papers back, locked the drawer, and told Tony to add a safety talk to tomorrow's agenda. Work doesn't pause for storms. It just lowers its head and leans. That afternoon, I stood over the job site and watched a crane set a beam like a man placing a promise. The envelope was in my desk, but the plan lived in my bones now. Karen texted a one-line message. You got served? Without an emoji or a name, just that familiar number that used to mean dinner plans and dog food. I typed back, yes. Then I put my phone away. Tony came by, raised an eyebrow toward the trailer. You want to talk? He asked. Not much to say, I told him, watching men guide steel into place with 2 fingers and a prayer. She thinks she's about to be very rich. Is she? He asked. I let the quiet carry my answer, then smiled the kind of smile you only manage when your footing is sure. What she asked for is exactly what I was hoping for, I said. Tony blinked. Meaning? I nodded at the beam settling true. Meaning it's time to let them think they're winning. Court in Houston felt like church with fluorescent lights, pews packed, air cold, whispers clipped short when the door opened. I walked in with Robert at my shoulder and kept my eyes steady, the way you do when you carry something breakable through a crowded room. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table in a black dress that said this was a ceremony, not a fight. Chin high, shoulders square, she didn't look at me, not once. Derek slid into a seat behind her, tie too bright for a weekday morning, the kind of choice men make when they're overdressed for courage. I took in the clock, the seal on the wall, the judge's empty chair. Small things calm a man who builds for a living, straight lines, true corners. I breathed slow. Robert whispered, "We stay simple." I nodded. The bailiff called the case. When the judge walked in, the room stood as one body, then sat like a machine that knew its parts. Walsh, her lawyer from Denver, rose like a man stepping onto a small stage and filled the room with a voice built for juries. He painted a picture where Karen held the ladder while I climbed, where my business was our business, where sacrifice had a single face and a perfect memory. He said she kept the home, nurtured the marriage, deferred her career so mine could grow, and now sought only what was just and right. He used that phrase like it had teeth. He held up binders and tapped them like a preacher tapping a Bible. I have sat through progress meetings that ran longer and said less, but this was different. He was counting my life in a tone that made people nod. I didn't flinch. A builder knows the difference between a picture on paper and a structure that stands in weather. Robert wrote 2 words on his pad and slid it toward me. Stay quiet. I did. The judge turned my way. Mr. Walker, the judge said, voice even. Do you contest your wife's requests? The room leaned toward me. Robert's pen stilled. I stood, buttoned my jacket out of habit, and felt the weight of months settle into a single breath. No, Your Honor, I said. I agree to all of them. The words left my mouth clean, like a cut made with a sharp blade. A murmur rolled the room and then died under the bailiff's glance. The judge studied my face, looking for the angle, for the fight I wasn't showing. I kept my eyes steady. If you pour a slab right, you don't have to admire it. You let it cure. Very well, the judge said. The court will adopt the requests as presented. The gavel did not fall. Paper shuffled instead, and the clerk marked something that sounded permanent. I felt no panic. I felt alignment, the way a post feels when it sits plumb in a hole tamped true. Across the aisle, Karen's smile came up slow, the way morning fills a room through good curtains. Walsh exhaled, shoulders dropping like a man who'd beaten traffic. Derek's eyes lit like the billboard at dusk, bright, pleased, too eager. I could imagine the text already composing in his pocket. It's done. People in the back row craned to see the man who had just said yes to losing his life. I stayed still. Men my age know that silence isn't surrender. It's a tool you use when noise would cost you. The judge spoke about timelines and compliance, 60 days for transfers, procedures for payment. I nodded at the right words and let the rest wash past. Robert tapped my elbow once, a question without sound. I answered with a breath and a slight tilt of my chin. Not yet. Timing is everything. Walsh began to sit, already reaching for his phone. The judge cleared his throat. Anything further, Mr. Walker? The room leaned again. Yes, Your Honor, I said, voice steady as a level on fresh concrete. One more item for the record. I reached down, opened my briefcase, and slid out the manila folder that had ridden shotgun through late nights and long drives. Paper isn't heavy until it's loaded with truth. I held it with both hands and walked it to the bailiff like a man carrying a fragile beam, slow, sure, no drama. The room went quiet in that deep way rooms do when people sense a turn before they see it. Walsh stopped halfway into his chair. Karen's smile froze, not falling, just held like a breath. Derek tilted forward, hunting the angle, missing the drop. The bailiff handed the folder up. The judge took it, flipped the cover, and began to read. Corporate structures, trust deeds, dates, signatures, transfer logs, and a set of photographs clipped to the back. The air thinned. I returned to my seat, hands flat, eyes on the bench, and waited. The judge read in silence, flipping pages like a man measuring twice. First came the operating agreements, Walker Holdings owning the iron, Walker Construction using it by contract. Then the trust deed, ranch placed beyond reach, bloodline rules written plain as fence law. Dates matched, notaries stamped, transfers recorded before any filing, clean as a straight pour. At the back, clipped beneath the ledger, were Dana's findings. Hotel receipts in sequence, screenshots of forwarded client lists, photos that didn't need captions. I watched the judge's eyes track each line like a surveyor following a string. Around us, the room forgot to breathe. Walsh leaned forward until his tie touched the table. Robert didn't move. I thought of my grandfather setting a corner post. No speeches, just level and plumb. The judge closed the folder, weighed it with one palm, and looked at me as if seeing the other half of the board for the first time. The twist wasn't loud. It was undeniable. Mr. Walker, the judge said, voice formal but warmer at the edges. It appears the assets at issue were lawfully restructured prior to this action. He tapped the trust deed. And this land, he glanced at the legal description, the section and block I could recite by heart, is controlled by an irrevocable family trust with clear succession, not marital property in this posture. Behind me, a woman gasped. Somewhere a pen clicked and didn't unclick. I heard Walsh exhale through his nose, the way a man does when his map doesn't match the road. Karen's color drained to the shade of office paper. She searched the folder with her eyes as if there were a page that could unring the bell. There wasn't. The judge continued. The court adopts the agreement as to the operating company. Enforcement of other requests will require proceedings that may prove protracted. He looked directly at her. Counsel, advise your client accordingly. The room felt smaller. My lane felt clear. Lane. I stood before anyone else could speak. Your Honor, to honor the spirit of a clean ending, I have a revised offer. Robert had it ready. One sheet, plain numbers, no adjectives. $800,000, cash, within 30 days. In exchange, Mrs. Walker withdraws all remaining claims and leaves the ranch and related entities undisturbed. I turned to Karen so she couldn't mistake my meaning. Or we can spend the next 5 years in court trying to break structures that won't break while lawyers buy lake houses. Older men know that line. The only winners in a long fight are the billable hours. I wasn't angry, I was finished. You wanted half, I said, but you aimed at shells. I kept the substance legal and straight. Take the certainty. The judge raised an eyebrow, then nodded like a man who's watched too many families grind themselves down. Counsel? He asked. Walsh whispered, numbers meeting reality in a hurry. The clock on the wall got very loud. Walsh returned to the mic with a different voice. Your Honor, my client accepts Mr. Walker's revised offer. The judge confirmed, twice, then set it to paper. Karen signed with a hand that didn't look like hers. The pen left a small skid at the end of her name, as if the ground had shifted. I signed next, steady. Robert slid the copies into our folder and closed it like a carpenter closing a toolbox. 3 days later, Derek's partnership was redeemed at book value and his access revoked before lunch. Word moved as fast as bad news does in a good town. Vendors stopped taking his calls. An old client told me, "We build with men who keep their word." He understood the landscape. Karen tried to rattle the trust, spent money on lawyers who spoke confidently until the papers did the speaking for them. Then she moved on. Back at the yard, steel met sky, men laughed again, and the work sounded like itself. The storm had passed. What mattered was still standing. Evening lays a long orange stripe across the pasture as I sit on the ranch porch, boots up, coffee cooling, cabin wood answering back when I shift my weight. The house is quiet, not empty, quiet like a place that knows it's been protected. I think about the folder, the courtroom, the hands that tried to count my life like invoices, and the hands that taught me fences and straight lines. Best revenge? Refuse to be destroyed. You don't have to swing to win. You have to stand when the dust settles. The company hums, the land is where it belongs, and the name on the mailbox still means work done right. Tomorrow I'll fix a hinge, shake hands, and let wind carry the rest of it away. If you've ever held the line around what you built, say it with me in the comments. Still standing. And if you're not there yet, pull up a chair. We'll get you there.